We'll be starting up here in about a minute and a half. Another probably 45 seconds or so just to give folks time to sign in on what's at least a cloudy day here in Ithaca. Okay, so good morning and welcome to one of our foundational webinars. Hope everybody had a restful or at least enjoyable July 4th holiday. Um, and we're going to talk today about the planning process. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP Center. We're part of the Cornell Local Roads program, and we're going to get started. We are going to be taking some polls. We'll be using pollev.com. You've been on these before. You know how to do this, or you can download the app. I'll give you some more instructions here in a minute. And what we're looking at is the planning process for these are projects like the lacrosse building that's behind me and in the picture there, or something that is, related to a chip seal or a paving process or building a bridge. This whole process is the same. Heck, you can use it for deciding other things, as you'll see as we go through the course of our hour together. It's really just a reminder of some of the things to help us out. This is, again, part of our summer series of foundational webinars. After this week, we have equipment next week. We'll do pavement materials, shop safety, complete streets and the ADA, and the MUTCD signs. Bridge basics, we'll do a handbook panel. Still got to fill that completely out. And then finally, we're going to take off the Labor Day weekend and then go with snow and ice overview after that. So remember, if you haven't signed up for them too, we do have our fall workshop series. Right now, we've got reducing liability in snow and ice control. We may add some others, but those are definitely out, and you're welcome to sign up for those. Now, the instructions for the webinar, if you haven't been on one of these before, your audio settings down the lower left, you can check things there. We would ask you to open up your chat and open up your Q&A. The chat is one way. We'll send you information. That's where we can send you a link for the handout and send you a link for the polls, but we know that you don't get those chats unless you've already opened it up. So go ahead and make sure you're opened up, and then when I show the handout in a minute, we'll re-put those links in there so you can definitely have those. And I may ask you to raise your hand a few times during the course of our time together today. Now, this is worth one professional development hour for engineers here in New York State. For those of you who are surveyors and geologists, I'm looking into that, but I don't have it yet, but I'm working on it. Always takes time. But remember, only the person who is registered gets that unless you let us know ahead of time. It does count as a course, though that's not as critical as it used to be. Now, whether this is worth a PDH in another state, you'll need to check with your LTAP or TTAP center there. Okay, so let's do a bit of a welcome. And again, as a reminder, there is a handout. And let me go find the handout. The handout is really just an outline of today's talk. Some links that way you don't have to memorize the links or write anything down that we think are useful to look at, and then just a listing of the foundational webinars. And again, you can get those by just going to our website. It should be pretty simple to be able to do that. So let's do a bit of a welcome, and to do this, to help me out, we're going to do a bit of a poll, see who's on the call today. So you've seen these before, probably. So who do you work for? Town, county, city, village, state or federal, tribal, MPO, consultant, contractor, and we'll see how many honest folks there are that work for the weekend. Okay, we got one person working for the weekend. We've got, wow, I like it. It's a really good blend today. Okay, interesting blend. Cool. Okay, for all kinds of different levels of government, private sector. Okay. What is your job? Are you an administrator? Are you the highway superintendent? Are you an engineer? You're a planner? Are you in the field crew? I see someone in the field crew. That's good. Are you a town board or supervisor? Um, are you just doing whatever the boss tells you to do? And then, of course, there's always the famous none of the above. Okay. So, as I expected, a lot of engineers, especially when you hand out PDHs, they show up. And so, like on Halloween, you go to that house that gives out the big full-size chocolate bars, right? And then, where are you from here in New York State? Actually, you can be from anywhere. So, just click on the map and tell me where you're from. Okay. And again, if you can't put into the poll just isn't accessible, you can put it into the Q&A. Okay, so that's fine if you can't do that. Wow, all over the place. We even have some folks from Connecticut. And of course, we have our boat out in Lake Ontario. I don't know who's in that boat, but I didn't know they had Wi-Fi out there. But hey, that's cool. That's cool. Now, we have only an hour together, so I can't get into too much detail, but there are some great resources out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. New York State DOT, for instance, has their project development process. It looks an awful lot like the old game of life with little pegs, okay? And you're probably thinking the same thing. Hey, the font is too small. I can't read it. Well, don't worry about trying to read it. It's inside the New York State's Project Development Manual, which is referenced in your handout. And so later, you can look that up and see how the state goes through that process. But what I want to just talk about as we start this conversation is thinking about the overall 10,000 foot elevation view. So really, when you think about it, there's a planning process. So we plan what we're going to be doing. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to scope something. To me, scoping may be the single most important phase, so we'll spend some time on that. We then design what we're going to build, maybe modifying the scoping, but we'll talk why that's risky. And then, of course, we can go to construction. And while it's not highlighted here, I make sure I put in there in big bold print operations and maintenance, because to me, that has to be part of the planning and scoping process, and we'll talk about why. Now, the federal government, when they get involved, they have a different flow chart. So if you ever see something from the feds, their chart looks very different. But remember, they're worried about how the funds go in and out. And so they're worried about planning up to audits, but it's the same concept. The difference is at the end of the process, when they hand it off to operations and maintenance, they pretty much step back. Okay. But it's still the same process. And if you look in the local programs manual from the state DOT, it's a big wheel, and we talk about that in our local federal aid class, but it's the same thing. We started planning, we then do scoping, design, construction, operations, and maintenance. And what we're going to talk about today, and what I think is so critical, is in the planning process, you really want to do this entire process, the whole wheel on paper or in your head, on a whiteboard, whatever works for you, so we don't miss something. Okay. Now we do have a workshop we do on local federal aid. We do that 1 or 2 times a year, depending on demand and need. Certainly, when we see calls for federal funds, like we did with the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan in the spring, we will hold that. So if you haven't done federal aid projects, that might be something to look for. And if there's enough demand, we probably could squeeze one in if there's enough folks who really need that class. You can also see an old copy of it. It is recorded up on our website, and that website will be on the last page of today's webinar. So let's start with our first real poll. How long does it take you? How long do you take from project inception to construction? In other words, you're thinking, I want to build that big lacrosse building behind me, or I want to do a chip seal even. How long does it take you to go from project inception to construction? Yeah, most of us are thinking several years out. So we have to be looking beyond this year's budget. And hopefully we have an asset management plan to decide on that. And I know that if it's a maintenance activity, it's going to be shorter. If it's a major construction activity, it could be more. And of course, if you're doing something really large, like the K Bridge down in New York City or the I-81 reconstruction in Syracuse, that's a lot more than 5 years. The key here, the thing I want you to think about as part of this process is that has to be part of your funding. It has to be part of your communication strategy. You really need to be thinking about how long that project is going to take. And if you're going to have to get a lot of permissions, permits, agreements, that may add time. In fact, we know that if there's a federal aid project, that has to get on the state's transportation improvement plan, and that means it could take a little bit longer. So you really need to be thinking about that as we do our project planning. Now, let's talk about what a lot of people think project planning is and step by step. A lot of people think it's starting with enthusiasm. We're going to be excited. And we like that. We like, we're going to build a big plant. We're going to build a lacrosse stadium. We're going to be doing a paving project. The problem is when we get into it, we sometimes get some we get disappointed a little bit because there's just things that happen that we just like, really? And so there's disillusionment. And because of delay, the prices might go up. We start worrying about supply chain and cost. And so we begin to panic a little bit. And eventually we want to figure out what went wrong. So we search for the guilty. That doesn't always work. We sometimes punish the innocent. And of course, at the end, we still have a ribbon cutting. We always praise and honors for the non-participants, right? Now, this is a bit of sarcasm, but the best humor has some sarcasm and in it, but it also has some truth. And here's the thing I want you to walk away from this slide. More than anything else, make sure you've thought the entire project through, including operations and maintenance, as opposed to these folks here who are putting in security ballards. You've seen this picture before if you've seen many of my talks. And they're using a quick set cement that takes about 30 minutes to get hard enough to have to be jackhammered. Yep, they had to go and jackhammer out one of those ballards so they could get their own van out. So let's do a project together and talk about the real steps. And the project we're going to do is not the Sunday that you've probably seen before, but today we're going to do a taco. Okay, so I want everybody in your head to get a taco. What would you like to have for a taco? I'm not going to do any more than that. We'll talk about what that could be in a minute. And the project exercise we're going to do, I'm going to have you put in all the things you need for a taco with, here's the rule. It's assuming you're starting from where we are now, from scratch at your home kitchen. And I want to be ready to make the next taco. So it's the whole process from making and getting ready for the next batch of making of tacos. Are you ready? Here we go. So here is our scope exercise. We will be doing some scopes on real work or field work here in a little bit, but let's have you put in there what you think you need. You might need ground beef. Some of you want a ground beef taco. That's fine. You need a pan to cook it. You'll need a list of ingredients, right? What's your protein going to be? It might not be beef. Maybe it's chicken. Maybe it's taco shells. Let's see anybody doing a soft shell today. Yep, we got some tortillas. We got some soft shell people. Some people have deer. They're going to make a deer taco. That could be interesting. Fish, plates. Okay. So I'll give you about another 20, 30 seconds to put in all the things you think you need, and then we'll come back to this list. And again, you can throw in the Q&A what you're thinking of that you might need. Okay. So let's get all that stuff. Okay. Okay. So I'll come back to this in just a minute. I'll let you add to it, 'cause that's fine. So keep thinking about it. But let's talk about what a project planning really is. Okay, that map or the circle or the game of life that the state uses for projects, it really is a step-by-step process. Okay, so the first step is planning the project. That means you need to think about the scope of the project. What's going to be done for engineering? Does it have to be engineered, or can you use pre-engineered or pre-manufactured projects and products? You're going to need to mobilize and get ready to get out there and get the work done and bring everybody on board, okay? And get ready to make, in this case, we're talking about tacos, but could be anything. We'll talk more about prep work. Within to prep everything on site or beforehand. I was listening to a cool podcast on the building of the Empire State Building. Think about the prep work for buildings like that. It was actually prepped in New Jersey, but then you have to get it over to Manhattan. Things like that. And you actually have to build it. And there's a coordination activity that's going on. When you're done with construction, you're going to clean the site up and make sure it's ready to go. And then, of course, there's the operations component to it as well. And then a step that we don't always do, but I think it's a very important step. And when we're done, we look at a project and we go, did it work well? Did it not work well? What could we do to make it better? We do that with everything we do with our training program, our workshops, and our webinars. You should do that for the projects that you build as well. So let's look at our tacos. Okay, so let's think about all of those steps when it comes to our tacos. Okay, so let's see. We've got our scope. Okay, we've done our engineering. Okay, did we have everything that we wanted to have on there? Okay, so let's see. We've got some meat, we've got shells. We went shopping. I see shopping. That's important. May not have to go to the store. You may not have it. Um, we say purchase. I'll take that for money. That's something we sometimes forget about. There is a cost to these things. You got to have some spices. Okay. Let's see. Oh, someone did remember a spatula and some utensils. It's really hard to make these things without that. Um, I don't see any napkins. Does anybody see napkins? Because remember, part of the process is you're probably going to eat the tacos. So you got to have a napkin. Oh, somebody's throwing a napkin in for me. So let's think about that. Did we include everything on our list? Okay. Okay. So let's look at a taco. I found this one on the internet. This is a shrimp taco, but it could be any taco that you want. So in terms of the scoping and the engineering of our taco, did we come up with what we really wanted to have on our taco? Okay. And how are we going to put it together? If you put too much into a hard shell taco, it breaks apart. Soft shells are nice, but they can be overstuffed. So we have to be careful about that. We have to mobilize. We have to get our pan out. Okay. Did we get our pan and everything out there? Okay. What do we have to prep? If you're cooking any kind of protein, what do you have to prep? Do you marinate it ahead of time? Do you spice it up? Those are things you would do long before you do the cooking process. It may be sitting in the oven or in the fridge for an hour or two. You got to actually cook it and get ready to go and construct it. And that's how these taco places and taco trucks work because they've done all of this and then they just quickly throw it together. And then, of course, they have to clean up the site after it gets eaten and get ready to make the next set of tacos. And in terms of operations with tacos, or any food product actually, is you think about the fact that you're doing it on a daily basis. And so, what are you ready for the next event? Did you restock the pantry or do you have to go back out to the grocery store? And do you do this? Do you go, did I really like that or am I just doing the same thing because I've always eaten it the same way? Maybe try tweaking something, okay? So that's something to think about, and it can be done for anything we do, and we're going to do this exercise together a few times. And you could write these things down. We actually have, and there's a link in our handout for standard operating procedures. But you can write all of these things down, the scope and the engineering that's involved. By the way, think about what they call that for making tacos. It's called a recipe. A recipe is the same thing as a standard operating procedure. It lists the ingredients, it lists the cooking process. A good one will actually tell you the prep time, and so you don't have to reinvent the wheel you'll find a recipe that you really like, but you might tweak it slightly. I mean, how many of you have taken a good recipe and then tweaked it to make it even better? Okay? Here's the thing when it comes to scope and engineering. Make sure you know where you're starting from and where you're going to. I don't know if this is a famous or infamous picture I pulled off the internet of a flight that I took from Detroit, Michigan to Indianapolis, Illinois. In the air about, if there's no problems, half an hour total. Okay? That includes takeoff and landing. Usually a pretty quick flight. On this particular day, all those yellows and greens that you see in the background were thunderstorms, and we were weaving around them. And we were in the air for over an hour and a half, almost 2 hours by the time we actually landed. And at one point, we circled over Terre Haute, Indiana. Let me get my pen here working. Let's see, I'll pick a color that's not. Yellow should actually work pretty well. There's Terre Haute, if you're ever wondering. There's Terre Haute, Indiana. We flew over Terre Haute. And then at one point, the pilot comes on and says, we're running out of fuel. We got to go to Louisville. That's where we loop down here. And finally realized, oh, the airport's reopened, and we flew back and landed. I don't know how much extra fuel, but point is, keep in mind where you're starting from and where you're going. That's key number one for doing any project. And key number two, be really careful of scope creep. Okay? If you want a swing tire for the kids, that's great. What do you need for a swing tire? You need a rope, you need a good tree, you probably need something to protect the branch at the top. You need an old tire, maybe drill some holes in the bottom to keep the water from building up so you don't get mosquitoes. Not a lot of work. But boy, it's easy to go, well, yeah, but we could make it better and we could build a fancy swing. Can you afford it? Do you really want that? So be really careful with scope creep. Try to get a good scope, lock it down, hold to it, and you'll actually be happier. It's easy to get outside your scope. Now, in terms of your timeline and schedule, you'll see lots of people talk about this. You see this in all kinds of business writings and construction and everything. And that's, you can get good, fast, and cheap, and you get to pick any two. And there are ads all over the place that say, oh, you can get all three. Well, there's usually a compromise that we have to balance between these things. If you want to do something really fast, you might have to pay a little bit more. If you want to cheat a little bit, you can get it fast, or you can make it good quality, but you got to pay more. So good, fast, and cheap, it is usually hard to get all three. And be careful that you don't fool yourself into thinking you have all three when you don't. And of course, how many of you would agree that if I had to only pick two, raise your hand if you agree cheap is the one we should probably not select. If we could only pick two, raise your hand. Yeah, I hope everybody raises their hand because really cheap sounds good, but does it really save you money in the long run? How many times have you been in a cheap office building where they use linoleum, they use the cheap vinyl tile rather than putting in something nice? And sure, it looks good the day they did it, but a few years later, it's already degrading, and now you have to maintain, and it just looks wrong. So think about the long-term cost when you're coming up with stuff. So as you put your budget together, make sure you think about everything. I have a really bad acronym. I apologize, but it does work as a good reminder for things when you've got your budget. You're going to have the materials cost. You're going to have invoices. You're going to have labor, and you're going to have equipment. Mile. Okay? Now, when I talk about materials, when I talk about invoices, when I talk about all those things, just realize that these are just ways you can separate things out. There are no requirements that it has to be any one particular group. Where you do your budget, you can do lots of different things for budgeting. We have a whole class on how to budget. But I break it down this way mainly from the standpoint materials are things that I stockpile. I'm going to pull from my stockpile. So that could include your stones, that could include your guide rail parts, your signs, things like that. Invoices are things I purchase directly for a job. That might be asphalt, concrete. That might be Portland cement concrete. It could be steel, things I can just directly apply. And then our own labor and equipment. And we definitely need to include your own labor and equipment if you're trying to decide whether you're going to do it in-house or you're going to bring in an outside contractor if you're trying to compare two different ways you do something, okay? Now, let's just take a little bit of time and talk about contingencies. These are pretty important. In the Q&A for me, I'm going to lower everybody's hands. Lower them down. In the Q&A for me, tell me what for a typical project, we'll just say a bridge project as an example, would you like to have in your budget for a contingency? What amount of money would you put in for a contingency for a budget? I got 15%, I've got 10, 15, 30, 20, 10, 15, 20. Okay. So you get a range of contingency budgets. Okay. If it was a project you've done a lot, like maybe a paving or chip seal or something like that, it might be smaller. Okay. So the contingency depends on how often you've done something. If you've done it a lot, I actually think 5 to 10% is all you need. Okay. But that depends on how good your estimates are. We do a conference every year with all the LTAP centers from across the country. We all meet in one location and we have a budget. We try to put a little contingency in there. We've done it enough where we don't have to have a huge contingency, but when something changes, we usually have to go, we need to be a little conservative. We bump it up a little bit. So let's say you've never done a particular kind of paving. You're a hot mix organization, you decide to go to warm mix. Well, maybe the first couple of years, you bump that contingency up in your budget. Give yourself another 5% so that you know I'm not going to go over budget, or at least I've got a little bit of leeway just in case. Okay? Now, in terms of your schedule, that's a place where the contingencies get even more challenging. Okay? Because obviously things can affect that schedule, and we'll do a little exercise here in a minute of what kind of things can affect the schedule. The takeaway with contingencies is you need to have something. And how much? Well, depends how critical it is. If, for instance, you were doing a truck routing operation, you're trying to decide whether vehicles can use an old bridge, maybe you want to be a little bit conservative about whether or not a big truck could use an old bridge or not, because now the contingencies are out the window, and you've got to have a completely new cost, and it's money you can't get back. So let's just ask, what are the kind of construction problems that you might have to account for with either a budget or scheduling contingency? Give me some construction problems that cause you to have things slow down. Yep, weather is obviously the critical one. There could be groundwater issues, equipment availability. Oh, I like that one. Let's see. Okay, and again, if you can't access the poll, please throw it into the Q&A. Material supply. Okay, the building behind me that they're building, that big crane sat idle for 2 weeks. Didn't have some steel available. So the supply chain can make a big difference. Yeah, I see somebody threw in uh, wildlife issues, labor issues, getting equipment. Okay. Just think about all of those contingencies and then ask yourself, is this a budget issue? Is it a timing issue? Is it a little bit of both? Okay. Utilities is a really good one that you need to think about, which leads to the idea that we really need to do a good job of investigation ahead of time, especially for subsurface stuff, like in a bridge project, or if we're putting in storm sewers, water lines, things like that. So think about those construction problems, and as you're scoping things out, you really want to think about how that's going to affect and what's it going to do to your contingency. Okay? Now, here's the other thing I'd like to see everybody do for total cost. I call it the 3-digit rule. Okay? How many times have you seen a budget? Raise your hand. Be honest. How many times have you seen a budget for a big project like a bridge project or a paving project where the project cost ends in pennies, down to the closest penny? Raise your hand. Yeah, a lot of us have. Does anybody honestly believe a project that's $1,643,723.18 is that accurate? No, it isn't. Now, there's a couple of reasons people might do that. It might be that's what they were asked to do by the contracting agency or organization. That happens. It might be that's just a habit we've gotten into because the computer will do it. But really, if you think about it, the most you can do is put in the number of digits you actually know, and just think about the old slide rules that people use. We went to the moon using slide rules. Okay? Yes, there were computers, but a lot of it was done with slide rules. In fact, maybe I should have put the picture. I got a picture of Buzz Aldrin on his way back from the moon using a slide rule to check their location in space. And the slide rule's just hanging there. It's pretty cool. But think about what is the most you really know. Most of the time, it's probably 2 or 3 digits. So instead of putting down to the closest penny, if it's $1.5 million for the project, you probably could put down 1,530,000. But everything beyond that, you're just guessing. So I always tell people, if it's 530, 1.536 million, 1.54. Just round it up a little bit. It's not going to be a lot percentage-wise, and it actually becomes part of your contingency as well. And it's more honest with people. You're not putting in faith in something that really isn't that true. Okay? Now, in terms of mobilization, we want to make sure we're ready to do the project. Mobilization is going to make a huge difference in terms of both the cost, the construction timing, and where do you mobilize in the first place. I mean, think about this. This is the world's largest snow creature. Okay? You can see they actually used a crane to set some of the snow. Think about how you have to mobilize for that. You got to get the snow, you got to have it accessible. It has to be cold enough. How do you keep it covered on a hot day so it doesn't melt or get too icy? Is think about the mobilization problems that exist in any project that you do. And again, that's why I'm a huge fan of doing the project by paper, whiteboard, talk it through, sit down as a group, and go through the whole process. And of course, that means you got to think about your equipment and your personnel. Are you going to do it in-house? Do you have enough equipment? Or do you have to bring in specialty equipment? So think about the project. How many pieces of equipment do you need? Do you need to rent something? Do you need to borrow from a neighboring organization, town, county, village? Can you work together? And the same is true with the personnel. Do you need specialty folks involved? Do you need a welder? Do you need somebody who's a crane operator? What's your contingency if that person gets sick? Okay. That's all part of the scope. That's all part of the process. So let's just give a good quick example, and that's how many trucks do you need? Okay. So I'm just going to do a simple project. Let's just think about it. How many trucks you need? We'll just do a paving or chip seal project, something that's very common by most local agencies. And the way you figure out how many trucks is really simple. You just take the number of trucks is the cycle time, and we'll come to cycle time in just a minute, divided by the discharge time at the paver, at the chipper, at the site. Okay, so that cycle time is going to include the discharge time itself. So that's included in there. Okay, it's going to include the round trip time from the site out to wherever the stockpile is, or the asphalt plant, or wherever they're picking up the material. Loading time. Okay, so that's the time it takes to load the truck. Are you loading it yourself? Are you having somebody load it on site? Break time, you probably need to include some break times, maybe not every single cycle, but maybe you tell the drivers, hey, feel free to take a break every second cycle. And if you assume it's a 15-minute break, that means you need to add in about half that to the average cycle time. Okay, so let's just do one quick calculation together. Let's do a chip seal. Let's assume it's about a little over an hour to get total cycle time. And if you're moving with a good chip seal, you can discharge the truck even faster, but I'm going to make it simple. We're going to assume about a 5-minute discharge time for the trucks. So just do that calculation in your head and throw up into the Q&A, how many trucks do I need? How many trucks? Let's see what you come up with. I got a 14. I got a 14. Very good. Now, some of you might go 13. If you do the math, it's going to be 13 point something, okay? In fact, I'll get my little calculator out, and I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to take 67 minutes. I'm going to divide it by 5. I got 13.4. I always round up. This is a good camp. Again, back to that, what do I know? I can't get 0.4 trucks. They're really hard. I'd like to see one of those, so I'm going to round that up. So I'd probably go 14 trucks, okay? Now, the problem, of course, is, do I really want a 15th truck on site? Do I really want that contingency, that extra truck? What happens if there's a breakdown? What happens if there's a detour because they have a crash and they have to go around it? What happens if the plant has a problem? What kind of contingencies do I need to have with my trucks? Okay? And it's a balancing act. So I'm just going to ask you, how could I reduce the number of trucks that I need? Let's say I don't have 14 trucks. I can't get my neighboring towns to join me, and so I don't have as many trucks. What could I do to get away with less trucks if it turns out I really need maybe 20 or 15? So we'll see what you come up with. This is one of the cool ones. I'll let you put the answers in, and then I'll show them to you. So I'm going to give you about another 15 seconds and see what y'all came up with. Okay, let's see what you got. And the answer is, number one thing came up is increase the discharge time, slow things down. That actually is really important with certain work, paving jobs and even chip seal jobs. You don't want that chipper or paver to actually stop, because that actually creates long-term problems. So you actually may want to slow down the discharge time. If you just can't get the trucks, you may have to adjust that. Certainly getting closer is going to make a Big difference. Okay. You might change who's loading the vehicle. Maybe you actually assign a loader operator to speed the process up. If you got enough trucks, it might be worth it. Okay. That might be something. You could put in larger trucks. Maybe you only have 6-wheelers, and maybe you get some 10-wheelers or even some flowboy type trucks, depending on what you got available. Which means you have to think about changing your overall prep work and your mobilization. Maybe you pre-stockpile a little bit closer. You have a series of stockpiles so that nobody's more than 20 minutes away from a pile. That means you've got to stockpile and find a place for it, maybe even move a loader around. And so again, these are things that you can think about, and they're all part of the cost that you can come up with. Now, in terms of your supplies and your stockpiles, obviously there's going to be supply chain issues that you're going to have to deal with. There's going to have to be a little bit of what they call slack time in your path that you're dealing with in terms of what happens if there's a bad weather day? What happens if you're losing equipment? What is the critical path item? What are the most important things that have to get done first before you can go to the next phase? Okay? And are there limitations on what you can do when? This is a building they were building at Cornell, which a deep foundation for part of it, but it's a huge basement, and they had to wait in the weather because they were worried about high water tables at the one end. So something to think about. How do you do your supplies and your stockpiles and things of that? So what prep work can you do ahead of time to make that work even better? Okay. Now, again, prep work is good for every project. This is me making some green chili stew. In fact, I need to look up when the green chilies come out of Wegmans. I need to make the house smell like green chilies. Green chilies are great for making stew, but I can tell you right now, if you just get them, throw them into the pot, bitter, bitter, bitter. Nope, you have to peel them first. Okay? Which means you get them roasted. They do most of the work for you, but you're going to have to clean those skins off. Otherwise, it just doesn't taste good. A little bit's not bad. That little bit of bitter is okay, but a lot of it, I've made that mistake once. I won't do that again. So you got to think about the prep work. And that's true for any job that we're going to be doing. Okay? So for a construction project, and well, let's just look at, it could be paving, it could be a bridge project, it could be a storm sewer installation. Just give me some ideas of prep work you got to do. Yeah, grubbing, clearing and grubbing, absolutely. How do you access it? Do you need a field house? Ooh, I like that. Do you not? Okay, did you survey it ahead of time? Okay, look at signage. Yeah, what do you have to close? What's the roadway? Did you lay it out, marking? Okay. Do you have fences? Do you need a fence around it or not to keep it safe? Yeah, I'm looking for two more here. Temporary traffic control, a work yard. Okay. I'm looking still for two things. Environmental, I'll give you that one. Okay, environmental, that gets, again, do we need silt fences or wattles to keep the silt on site? So we got that. Okay, that's good. Temporary, you got your permits. That's good. Okay, I'm looking for one more. Nobody put utilities. Did you call to see if you've got any utilities you might have missed? You can do that, you know. You can call ahead, even if you aren't digging into the ground. There's actually ways to do that. There we go, 811. To figure out what on-site prep work, you could do that way in advance to figure out how that might change things. Because if you're on a water line running right through things, okay, and do you need to do additional borings because of that? And of course, these things can all change. Now, of course, here in New York State, we have right-of-way issues. Those are always fun, okay? Our right-of-way for most town roads and village streets, it's by use. For a lot of county roads, it's still also by use, and we could spend a whole hour. We have a class. For almost half of it, we talk about right-of-ways by use. But you got to know the right-of-way. And if it's federal aid, you have to have that right-of-way in writing. Okay, so if you're getting federal aid, it has to be in writing. And it's actually probably a good idea in any case to really clarify what is the right-of-way, who's going to be doing what afterwards. And of course, to get your permits. Okay, so in the Q&A for me, tell me, how long does it take to get a typical permit through the DEC and the Army Corps? How long do you take to get a permit through DEC and Army Corps? for those of you who've done that process. I've got everything ranging from 8 months. There's a smaller one, 6 months. I got 2 to 5 years. Too long, 6 months. 6 to 9 months if they like you. 4 months. Now that comment about if they like you is actually really important. That sounds crazy. Creating a relationship matters. Okay? My advice is to create and nurture that relationship if you possibly can. I know it can be difficult, but in a pinch, if you have that relationship, you might be able to get it faster than you think if it's a really important project or there's an emergency. Okay? I've gotten permits in less than 2 weeks through both agencies. It's not easy. And it only worked because I knew the right people that could help me shepherd the process through. And this was the most important part. What I provided them was a well-drafted scope that showed I was going to follow the procedures. I can't just shortchange it because I know somebody, because I can tell you right now, that actually will backfire on you. So it can really help to create that relationship. But you have to account for that timing in your process. And of course, what if you need a permit from the Adirondack Park Agency because you're using the Adirondack Park? So what if you need a permit from a fisheries group? So again, think about all the things you need there. And do you need work zone traffic control? Is that part of your process? I hope the answer is yes. Okay. Do you do it yourself? Do you hire somebody? Do you have another agency do it? These are all part of that scoping and contingency process that come into play. Okay. And work zone traffic control, I wish we would put more time and effort into it. It's not easy. I know that, and it's not cheap, but the value of a life, we all want to get home every single day, and that's the goal. And really, a good work zone helps make the project more efficient, and you get more quality of work because you're focused on the work rather than the traffic control, and it's better communication with the public. So let's build things now. Let's start to build things in a minute. We're going to do some scoping exercises. But when it comes to construction, whether it's a chip seal or paving or a bridge, we have our construction problems. Okay, you've listed all of those construction problems. Okay, what I want to talk about are some of the most critical ones and why, if we account for them properly, we might actually be able to make our project last a little bit longer later on. Okay, so let's go back and look at our problems. The one you came up first, absolutely top of the line, was the weather. Okay. The big thing with the weather is think about the limitations for the work. Okay. And then shutdown. So let's start with limitations for work. In the Q&A, what is the last day, typical year? I know every year is different. In fact, I wish we would actually look at the weather and every year being different. But what is a good rule of thumb for the last day you should be doing a chip seal in New York State above New York City? What's the last day we should really be doing a chip seal? That's quite a range. I've got November, I've got September 15th. Now, this date has changed, like it or not. It has changed. We used to say Labor Day. I think September 15th is probably not a bad day to think about it. If you're with a town, you probably should have your chip seals done before you go to the town conference in the fall. And why is that? I mean, we've all done chip seals later than that. We've chip sealed in the snow. But the reality is it has to do with the percentage of those chip seals that are going to fail. They're directly related to the weather. The later you go, the shorter time you have to cure, and the less chance you're going to have good success. So the closer you can be to the middle, the better off you're going to be. So truth be told, I actually would prefer us to shoot even sooner. In fact, if I can, I actually want to do my chip seals in July and August, maybe even late June, because I don't want to do it too early either. And of course, each year is going to be different. This year has been very, very wet. Look outside. If they're cutting down hay, you probably can do a chip seal. And the same thing is true for hot mixes and cold mixes and warm mixes. The windows are going to be different, but you got to look at the weather. Now, the other one is you're actually doing work with the weather. You know, you're actually paving. You're out there with a crew and you're putting down one of these new performance engineered mixes and you're paving along, and here comes some rain. Do you have a rule of when you're going to shut down, or are you just going to keep working? What are you going to do? You got to think about that as part of your operating procedure. Is it better to just stop the job? Is it better to keep paving? May depend on how heavy the rain is. If the rain's heavy enough to create damage to the asphalt, you probably should stop it. If it's short enough and you're tarped properly, you might be able to continue and use that asphalt. These are things to look at, and maybe you actually go, we got rain coming. We got good radar information. We're just shutting down at noon. We're not going to do any chip seal after or any paving after 1 and get it done so it's got time to be placed and rolled and put in good place. Okay. And this is true for everything we're doing outside. Weather is our big issue. Another one that makes a huge difference in terms of especially local agencies is the work week and overtime. Most local agencies switch to a 4-day week, which means 10 hours a day on average. But of course, you want to keep working when the sun is shining. So you have to balance those things. Do you just go ahead and say, we're doing paving, we're doing chip seals, we're doing a project that we really need to work. We're going to work that overtime on Friday so we can get the job done. As they say, you make hay when the sun is shining. And you need to include that in your cost calculations. You might be surprised. It might actually be cheaper to work those 5 days and get more done and take advantage of good weather than even the cost of the overtime. But it's something that you need to think about. Now, QA/QC, what does QA/QC stand for? Well, it's not quit asking and quit checking. It's quality assurance and quality control. And there are different people will talk about how to do quality assurance and quality control. Quality assurance could be sort of checking that people did it the right way. Quality control is typically thought of as the numerical things. We measure the strength of the concrete. We check the amount of air, things of that ilk. They really go hand in hand, and there's a lot of overlap. Okay, that's your testing, your sampling, your inspection. Okay, some people like to say the quality assurance is the agency and quality control is the contractor because that's the Q and the A and the C. Again, really comes down to, do you have a good plan in place? So let's just ask, and I decide today I will do asphalt paving because we haven't really talked about asphalt paving. Okay. And this one didn't get cleared. I'm going to clear it because it's not quite the same. That's a different project we were doing. Give me some QA items for asphalt paving, things that you can check. Compaction, yep. Temperature, depth. Some of these are control items, but that's okay. I QA, maybe I really should just say QA/QC. Temperature, okay. Density, okay. Consistency. There are some measures for that where they're actually starting to realize that consistency of temperature and depth and compaction is just as important sometimes as the actual temperature you measure at one individual spot. Okay. How are your joints? What kind of joints do you have? Yep, there's joints. Shut up. Thank you. Okay. Make yourself a list. I'm a huge fan of having a list to check of things we want to look for. We have pocket guides for inspectors that are available and help you not miss the important things. And again, that's where you can create forms, part of your standard operating procedure. As you get your tickets, you check your quantities, make sure you're getting what you're paying for. And that includes everything from how many times it's rolled to the temperature, the joints, the edges. What kind of joints do you have? Do you have safety edges? Do you have Michigan joints and wedge joints in the middle? Think about the QA materials. That's going to make a big difference. Now, of course, like it or not, we're going to get change orders. They're going to happen. We don't want to have a situation like this. The boat's name, by the way, is change order, and the little boat is the original contract. Now, somebody there's obviously having a little bit of fun, but the key here is a change order needs to be legitimate. Okay, and you may hear the term order on contract. It's the same thing. It's a change order. Two things I'd like you to take home here. One, don't be afraid of change orders. I've run into this way too often where people are like, oh, a change order. I can't do a change order. Change orders are fine, but they should be for legitimate activities. Okay? They should be for things that were out of the control of the contractor or that honestly got missed by either the designer, agency, or maybe the contractor, but was out of their control. Okay? So a change order because you're having a hard time getting a particular material might not actually be a proper change order. A change order because something suddenly got banned, or suddenly there was a change in import duties, or maybe the import duties went down. Uh, you have to realize what's an important in terms of change orders. And the other one is time extensions. You can be a no-cost time extension. There could be a cost time extension. A lot of it might depend on what you've got available for a budget. So change orders are not evil, but we do want to make sure we have good, legitimate change orders. And then at the end of it, make sure you cleaned up the site. Uh, we want to look good, not just for the environmental issues, but also from the standpoint of what we're communicating to the public. Because if you leave a whole stockpile of stuff sitting there for 2 months, what does that look like? Really, when you're done, clean up and get ready for the next job. Okay? So, if you got a barn, think about your barn. If the barn looks organized and clean, you're ready for the next job. It should be the same thing for jobs out into the field. Because, like it or not, a lot of what we do in the field is our public relations. Okay? Our image comes from what we do. Now, I haven't talked about this a lot. I brought it up earlier, and that's operations. When you're done with a project, you got to make sure it's going to operate properly. We don't want to be caught in midair. And so one of the things I'm a firm believer in is think about when you're building your project, when you're doing your planning way back at the beginning, how are you going to operate it? Okay? If you're putting in a bridge, for instance, do you put a joint in your bridge or do you have a jointless bridge? Which is easier to maintain? Maybe it costs more to put in the jointless bridge, but now you have less operational cost. That needs to be part of the scope. Okay? It needs to be included in the initial concepts. Pay me now, pay me later. Maybe you pay a little bit more up front so that you have less operational cost later on. Okay? Now, we're going to do an evaluation of everything. I'm going to ask an honest question, and it's okay. I don't care if you don't raise your hand, but ask yourself on every project that you do you go out, check it, and see if it's working a couple of weeks later? Raise your hand if you've got a habit of trying to do that. I'm not going to say you're going to succeed every time, but it's really a good idea. For a paving project, maybe go out a couple of weeks later or after the first rain event to see if it's ponding water. Any drainage structure, check that. Traffic signs. If you change a traffic pattern, go and watch it. Maybe reanalyze it and just see, boy, is it doing what I think it should be doing? Do an evaluation for that project and to get ready for the next project. And one of my favorite examples of that is I got a picture of a plastic culvert pipe. Okay? It had been in the ground for about 2 weeks, a couple of rain events. The fix here is easy. Put a piece of concrete slab from the old culvert, slide it under there for erosion control. But what would it have looked like in 2 months? It wouldn't have just been a small hole. It would have been a major hole. It could have even gotten back to the roadway. So again, get in that habit to go back out. So let's just ask yourself, what are the biggest issues with new projects? What are we going to be looking for? Let y'all put those in. And I'm going to check my timing. Yep, we're right where I need to be. Funding, yeah, funding is always an issue. Water. We always say drainage, communications, and safety come into play. Okay. Longevity of the material. Did we design it right? I mean, if you're putting in a culvert pipe, how long do you want it to last? Maybe you spend a little bit more on a thicker one. Okay. Yep. Is it functioning as expected? Were there unforeseen conditions? When you paved it, all of a sudden there's more traffic. Utilities that failed 2 months after you put in the roadway, it's like, yeah. In some respects, it is a scoping problem. Think about the issues that you've got. And if there is an information gap, great. That's good to know that you've got one. then try to figure out how you can fill that information gap. And in an hour together, we can't cover all of these things, but I do want you to think about those issues as you're developing your scope, and especially for repeated activities, develop some standard operating procedures. Okay, we have on the handout, you can develop your own. If you've got ones you think are especially good, send them our way. We'll be glad to post them. And that's what the state specifications are in a lot of ways. They're just standard operating procedures. They're recipes to do particular activities. So remember, when it comes to a project, before you turn any wheel or shovel, go through the whole process. Scope it, mobilize, think about the prep work, think about the construction, think about the cleanup and the operations. And then at the end of it, of course, you need to evaluate whether it worked. Okay? So what we're going to do, we have time, a perfect timing where I'd like to be. I'm going to go through a few possible projects. Okay? And so I'm going to let you guys help me figure out which possible projects. Do you want to do, for our first one together, do you want to look at a ditch project or a culvert project? Put in the Q&A. First one that gets me 3, and we'll do that one. Culvert project or a ditch project? I got ditch, I got culvert, I got a culvert, and a culvert. We're going to do culvert to start. Okay. We might have time the other. We'll see. Okay, so what I want you to think about, we're going to do a scoping exercise, just like we did with the taco. I'm going to have to clear it first, so don't go crazy yet. Think about what you would like to see for replacing this particular culvert pipe. Okay, culvert pipe has failed. Obviously, it's going to have to be replaced. So I want you to think about, what do we have to do, all the steps for doing a culvert. Let me clear it real quick, because right now we have tacos. Okay, so remember, this is a culvert replacement project. We're replacing this pipe arch that failed. Okay, very good. We got to get some funding. We got to maybe worry about aquatic animals crossing through. Is there a detour? What are the hydraulics? Is it big enough? What signage? We got to do a survey. We got to have a check the watershed. We might need to bring the soil and water people in. Or are you going to decide to put a concrete pipe in there because it's got a stone bottom? There's shale down there. Okay. What is the right of way? By the way, it's a town road, so it's probably a right of way by use. Okay. You're going to have to do an estimate for the cost. Okay. And by the way, in this particular case, if it's already failed, you might have to be doing it in an emergency basis to get it done. So now you're going to have a cost balance that you've got to deal with. Okay. So again, think about all the things developing that culvert. This is why having some standard operating procedures can be really helpful. That's why having emergency and contingency plans can be so valuable. And you never know what's going to happen. Some days there's always something weird. Okay. Let's do at least one more. This time, your choices for in the Q&A between a chip seal and a work zone. Chip seal or a work zone? Let's first 3 for the work zone. Work zone. Up. We're going to the work zone. Okay, we'll do a work zone project. Okay. Okay. Got a work zone. Okay. There's work being done at the intersection that you can see in the distance. Okay. I'm not sure I agree with this signage, but I want you to think about, I'm putting up a work zone for an intersection work. Okay, you're replacing, in this case, we're replacing a catch basin. I want you to tell me what is in there, and I got to clear the old scope. Let me clear that first. Okay, so now we're doing a work zone. Think about what goes into a work zone. How are you going to deal with a sidewalk? Are you going to need flaggers? Can you get away with just 2? Do you need 3? Yep. What detours? Not just for the traffic, but for the, let's see if they show up. Pedestrians, yep, and bicyclists, because this is on our campus here at Cornell. So what signs, what volumes if you deal with? Doesn't matter what time of year. By the way, absolutely it matters what time of year. They love to delay projects if they can until after graduation, actually after reunion, because there's a lot less traffic. Okay? So can you reschedule things a little bit, temporarily change them to a lighter period of time? If you're working near a school, can you wait until school's out to do the work? okay? Or if it's a short project, wait till the kids are in class, do it, and then be done before they go home that day. But that might mean you have to change your plans, okay? So again, those are the kinds of things to think about. It actually starts to get pretty quick. And again, I love to do this on a whiteboard or do it in meeting room, go through the whole process. Okay. We got time to do one last one. I'm gonna do the chip seal, the ditching one, just to give you one last one. We're gonna do a ditch. Now, this ditch has some issues with erosion protection, but just think a typical ditch project. Let me clear this and ask yourself for a typical ditch project, what might you need for a typical ditch project? Again, you might need some signage. Do you have enough labor? Do you have enough trucks? You need an excavator. How many trucks do you need? What's the spoil site? Very good. Do you need riprap or some erosion protection afterwards? Okay. What is the weather that day? Can you go uphill, which is preferred, but maybe you can't because of traffic issues, so you have to survey it ahead of time. Think about the whole process, and you're going to be a much happier when it comes to actually doing the work. And again, in a lot of cases, that's when we like to develop standard operating procedures. It really does make a difference. Okay? So again, I hope we gave you some ideas to think about. Hopefully you have something you can take home, some lessons learned. But of course, if you have any questions, just please feel to send me an email or go online to nysltap.org and you can find us. You can just search for us in Google too. And hopefully this will give you some ideas. And hopefully we'll see you on a future webinar, workshop, or another event. Everybody have a great week. Stay cool. Stay well. Bye-bye.